Hi, Year 3. How's your World Book Day going so far? Did you enjoy writing that story about the kidnapping? Fantastic. I've got another activity for you to do now. So I'm going to read another book to you. Okay, so we've had a look at this already. I'm going to read another book to you. So I'm going to get it up now and I'm going to share it with you. You may have heard of it. You may have even read it already. If so, that'd be fabulous. So let me just get my story, and here it is. I'm going to put my picture just here. The story we're going to be reading today is Flat Stanley by Jeff Brown. And there's a series now of these books. And when I was a little girl, this was the only Flat Stanley book that was around. There was no other Flat Stanley books, but now there's lots and lots of them. They've written a whole series, which is really fabulous. So if you do get the opportunity to read them, I would highly recommend them to you. Okay, then let's read it together. So Flat Stanley. The Big Bulletin Board, Chapter 1. Breakfast was ready. "I'll go and wake the boys," said Mrs. Lambchop to her husband, George Lambchop. Just then, the younger son, Arthur, called from the bedroom he shared with his brother Stanley. "Hey! Come and look! Hey!" Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop were both very much in favour for politeness and careful speech. "Hay is for horses, Arthur, not people," Mr. Lambchop said as they entered the bedroom. "Try to remember that." "Well, excuse me, but look!" He pointed to Stanley's bed. Across it lay the enormous bulletin board, and a bulletin board is a bit like, not as big as the boards that we have at school, probably about a quarter of that size, or maybe a little bit bigger. It's like a pin board that people will pin pictures and information onto. Across it lay the enormous bulletin board that Mr. Lambchop had given the boys a Christmas ago, so they could pin pictures and messages and maps on it. It had fallen during the night on top of Stanley. But Stanley was not hurt. In fact, he would have still been sleeping if he had not been woken by his brother's shout. He called out cheerfully from behind the enormous board. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop hurried to lift it from the bed. "Heavens!" said Mrs. Lambchop. "Gosh," said Arthur, "Stanley's flat." "As a pancake," said Mr. Lambchop. "Darnest thing I've ever seen." Oh dear. "Well, let's all just go and have breakfast," said Mrs. Lambchop. Then Stanley and I will go and see Dr. Dan and hear what he has to say. In his office, Dr. Dan examined Stanley all over. "And how do you feel?" he asked. "Does it hurt very much?" "Well, I felt sort of tickly for a while after I got up," Stanley Lambchop said, "but I feel fine now." "Well, that's mostly how it is with these cases," said Dr. Dan. "Yeah, we'll just have to keep an eye on this young fellow," he said. And when he'd finished the examination, sometimes we doctors, despite all our years of training and experience, can only marvel at how little we really know. He does look very confused looking at a picture. It's not a picture, it's Stanley. Looking at Stanley there, doesn't he? I wonder what he's thinking. What do you think he might be thinking? Oh, now they've got the nurse in. Let's see. Mrs. Lambchop said she thought that Stanley's clothes would have to be altered by the tailor. That's why they've got the nurse in to measure him. So she told Dr. Dan's nurse to take Stanley's measurements, and Mrs. Lambchop wrote them down. Stanley was 4 feet tall. Oh, that might be about as tall as you are, guys, in year 3. And about a foot wide and half an inch thick. It's not very thick then at all, is he? He's like a piece of card. Chapter 2. Being flat. When Stanley got used to being flat, he enjoyed it. He could go in and out of rooms, even when the door was closed, just by lying down and sliding underneath through the crack at the bottom. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop said it was silly, but they were quite proud of him. Arthur got jealous and tried to slide under the door, but he just banged his head. If you have a look here, Stanley looks very happy. Arthur, he looks definitely jealous there, doesn't he, of Stanley? Feeling quite frustrated, I would say, as well. Being flat could also be helpful, Stanley found. He was taking a walk with Mrs. Lambchop one afternoon when her favourite ring fell from her finger. The ring rolled across the pavement and down between the bars of the grating that covered the deep, dark shaft, and Mrs. Lambchop began to cry. "Oh, I have an idea," Stanley said, and he took the laces out of his shoes and an extra pair out of his pocket and tied them all together to make one long lace. And then he tied one end to the back of his belt and gave the other to his mother. "Lower me," he said, "and I'll look for the ring." Oh, look, now he is going into the drain there. "Thank you, Stanley," said Mrs. Lambchop, as she lowered him between the bars and moved him carefully up and down and side to side so he could search the whole floor of the shaft. 2 policemen came by and stared at Mrs. Lambchop as she stood holding the long lace that ran down through the grating, but just pretended not to notice them. "And what's the matter, lady?" said the first policeman. "Is your yo-yo stuck?" "I'm not playing with a yo-yo," said Mrs. Lambchop sharply. "My son is on the other end of this lace, if you must know." "Oh, get the net, Harry," said the policeman. "I think we've caught a cuckoo here." Just then, down in the shaft, Stanley cried out, "Ooh!" And Mrs. Lambchop pulled him up and saw that he had the ring. "Good for you, Stanley," she said. And then she turned angrily to the policeman. "Cuckoo indeed," she said. "Shame on you." The policeman apologised. We didn't get it, lady," they said. We've been hasty and we see that now." "People should think twice before making rude remarks," said Mrs. Lambchop, "and then not making them at all." The policeman realised it was a good rule and they would try to remember it. But one day, Stanley got a letter from his friend Thomas Anthony Jeffrey, whose family had moved recently to California. Now, California's in America. It's very far away. Would you like to go there? I would love to go to California. They've got some amazing sites there, which I'm going to show you very shortly. A school vacation, that means a holiday, was about to begin, and Stanley was invited to spend it with the Jeffreys. "Oh boy, I'd love to go," Mrs. Lambchop sighed. "A round trip, train or aeroplane ticket to California is very expensive," she said. "We'll have to think of some cheaper way." When Mr. Lambchop came home from the office that evening, he brought with him an enormous brown paper envelope. "Now then, Stanley," he said, "try this for size." The envelope fitted Stanley very well, and there was even room left over. Mrs. Lambchop discovered for an egg sandwich that made of thin bread and then a toothbrush case filled with milk. They'd put a great many stamps on the envelope to pay for both airmail and insurance, but it was still much less expensive than a train or an aeroplane ticket to California. So the next day, Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop slid Stanley into his envelope along with the egg salad sandwich and the toothbrush case full of milk and mailed him from the box on the corner. And the envelope had to be folded to fit through the slot. But Stanley was a limber boy. That means he was very flexible. And inside the box, he straightened right up again. And there he was. How fabulous. Mrs. Lambchop was nervous because Stanley had never been away from home before, and she rapped on the box. "Can you hear me, dear? Can you hear me? Are you all right?" Stanley's voice came quite clearly. "I'm fine. Can I eat my sandwich now?" "Oh, just wait an hour and try not to get overheated, dear," said Mrs. Lambchop. And then she and Mr. Lambchop cried out, "Goodbye, goodbye," and they went home. Stanley had a fine time in California, but when the visit was over and the Jeffreys returned him with a beautiful white envelope that they'd made themselves. It had red and blue markings on to show that it was airmail, and Thomas Jeffrey had lettered it valuable, fragile, and this ended up on both sides. And back home, Stanley told his family that it had been handled ever so carefully and never felt a single bump. Mr. Lambchop said it proved that jet planes were wonderful, and so was the postal service, and this is a great age to live in. And Stanley thought so too. I'm going to leave it there because we're going to go back to our lesson. So, Your task today, you're going to have 2 tasks for Flat Stanley. First of all, you are going to write a postcard from Stanley talking all about his adventures in California. So I've got some pictures here of California. So we've got the Golden Gate Bridge, we've got the Hollywood sign, we've got the beautiful beaches, the huge highways that they have there. Did you know as well that there's a Disneyland in California? So I want you to think about, so you might need to go and have a look at what does California have? What sites do they have in California? What do you think Stanley might have done in California? And you're going to write that on a postcard and send that. You're just going to write that on a postcard as if he was going to send that home. And then I have another task for you. So you have 2 tasks for Flat Stanley. I'm going to put my head on his head for now. Okay, so your first task is to create your postcard. Talk about all the fabulous things that Stanley would have done in California. Then your second task. Your second task is to decorate and cut out your Flat Stanley design, which my head is on right now. And I want you to, once you've designed him and coloured him in and you can collage him, you can make him out in any way you would like to. I would like you to pop him in an envelope and send him to school. Now, did you know if you go to Nisa by school, they sell stamps in there, and your mum works in there, doesn't she? So if you go there, you can buy a stamp. And what I'd love you to do, you might be able to buy an envelope too if you haven't got an envelope at home, is pop your Flat Stanley into the envelope, just how Flat Stanley went to California. But I want you to send him to school. So then next week when we come into school, we'll have loads of Flat Stanleys that you have made in school. So our address is Year 3, because it's obviously coming to us, Brookvale Primary School, Mallard Drive, Erdington, Birmingham, B23 7YB. So create your Flat Stanley, pop him in an envelope and send him to school. I'm really looking forward to receiving those next week, Year 3. It'll be such fun to receive them. So lots of activities for you today. Enjoy doing that, and you've got one more activity to do. Well, it's a few activities actually in my next video where I read to you the last part of The Firework Maker's Daughter. How exciting. You enjoy doing those tasks for me now this morning, Year 3, and I'm very much looking forward to them, and I'll see you next week.